Shalom. Every Sabbath and major holiday, we have a prophetic portion from the middle part of the Hebrew Bible, the prophets, that we read as a Haftarah following the Torah reading. And it's interesting always to figure out why the rabbi selected that particular portion to be read when it's read. And the Haftarah on the second day of Passover, or Pesach, is taken from the second book of Kings, and it tells about one of the most remarkable kings in the history of Israel. Not that well known. It's not as well known as Saul and Samuel and Solomon. King Josiah. He started his reign in 639, and I'll tell you that there's two different accounts of what happened here. One is in the second book of Kings, which we read on that Haftarah, and the other is in the book of Chronicles, which is at the end of the Bible. And we're going to tell slightly different stories. But basically, what happened was that Josiah started being king in 639, and if you read the book of Kings 1 and 2, you see that most of the kings of Israel and Judah, and I say that because once Solomon died, the kingdom split into two. You had 10 tribes in the north called Israel, 2 tribes in the south, basically Judah and Jerusalem. They had different kings, different lineages, and most of them were terrible. They brought in all kinds of idolatry and apostasy, disgusting things into the Holy Temple. Just horrible, and we can't even recognize it as Judaism today. So for whatever we geschrei about how Judaism is suffering, nothing was as bad as the times of those kings. Anyway, Josiah started out that way, and he had cultic prostitutes in the temple, and they had idolaters, and they had Baal and Asherah idols in the temple, and all kinds of stuff going on. Now, 8 years into his reign, suddenly he had a religious awakening. He decided that he needed to fix things. Now, this is according to Chronicles. And so 4 years later, he started to purify the temple in 627 BCE. And then 6 years after that, in 621, while trying to purify the temple, he found a book, which most scholars believe was the book of Deuteronomy. Now, Deuteronomy has over 70 new mitzvot that are not in the rest of the Torah. Many Bible scholars, not Orthodox, they wouldn't agree with this, they think this is heresy, believe that the Deuteronomy was probably written around then. In addition to that, it centralizes worship into the central shrine, and eventually, of course, then into Jerusalem and the Holy Temple later in history. And it also is very tough on idolatry. You can read the middle of the Deuteronomy about that. And it talks about a renewal of the covenant. And so, based on this book, Josiah realized that they had not been observing Passover correctly, that they had not been following God's will correctly, and he called all the people together and he read the book, and there was a renewal of the bris, the covenant, and of Pesach. Now, the Haftarah we read, and taken in a larger section from 2 Kings, has a slightly different story, that he was repairing the temple, not so much because of a religious revival, found the book, and that book led to the acts of purification and the religious revival, as opposed to the Chronicles story, which has him doing the purification and religious revival, and then he finds the book. So the writer of 2 Kings obviously wanted to place most of the focus on why Josiah decided to reform based on finding the book. In any case, this is the only time since Sinai, now we're talking 700 years or so, that all of Israel got together, all the people got together, to hear this religious message, to recommit to the bris. And it also says in this Haftarah that there was no Pesach celebrated like this since the times of the judges and the kings. So we're talking now hundreds and hundreds of years where Pesach was not observed in a significant way. So again, if we geschrei about Pesach not being observed that much or whatever, we've had a long time when we weren't celebrating Pesach in a significant way. So why is this Haftarah read on Pesach? Well, perhaps because we have to understand a couple of things. One is that the message of liberation continues to have to be retold and retold and retold in every generation, and to inspire us to use Pesach as an impetus for religious revival and rejuvenation, of re-strengthening. But also because we should take a look around us and realize that we, for example, in America, live in two cultures, in Jewish culture and in the culture of America. We're going to Israel in a couple of weeks with a group of congregants, and they're so excited about going to see Mea Sharim, which is like going back hundreds of years into the dark ages of people who want to live a completely isolated life as best they can without being part of Western civilization. But we are not like that. We are part of both civilizations. We have to constantly make compromises, and kind of figure out how to live our lives in both societies. But one thing we are reminded here about Josiah's courage in extirpating idolatry from the temple, of removing the things that were totally inimical to Judaism, Just like today, we have to try and figure out what is legitimate Judaism, what we can absorb from the common culture, and what we can't. We all know that the Seder that we experience on Passover is basically modeled after the Greco-Roman symposium dinners. We obviously have some changes, but you can go through the major steps of the Seder and say this was Greek, and this was Greek, and this was Greek, and this was Greek. For example, we take the Afikomen, which for them was a lascivious party at the end of their fancy discussion, and we turn it into a dry cracker, which says, continue sitting here and doing holy things. But this king stands as a great hero of Israel, and I want to just read the end of the Haftarah to give you a sense of the magnificence of what King Josiah did and the courage it took, and how we need to have courage to confront the challenges facing our people today, the challenges facing Judaism, and our desire to recommit to the covenant, but at the same time live a life in blending both civilizations. It says in 2 Kings 23, there was no king like him who turned back to the Lord with all his heart and soul and might, in full accord with the teaching of Moses, or did any like him arise after him. So Josiah was a unique king in the history of the Jewish people, and God bless him.